Now, we've all been talking about the speech in New York given by Greta Thunberg, the teenage Swedish climate activist. You've heard my view about it a couple of times now. Let's just have another snippet of that speech, a really traumatic and traumatised rant from Greta Thunberg.
You all come to us young people for hope. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones.
Well, many people around the world are saying this is some passionate plea for decent climate action. Other people like me say it's a really worrying rant full of misinformation, and it's just going to scare other kids. We spoke yesterday to child psychologist Clare Rowe via Skype. She joins us again in the studio. Thanks for joining us again, Clare. You've seen a lot of the reaction from adults, politicians, activists and the like. Where are you feeling now on this speech and its impact, not just on adults but on children?
Yeah, I don't think I've seen something for quite a long time that has produced such a strong reaction on both sides. My Facebook feed and everything is full of people calling Greta their hero, and then you know everyone else who's saying this is awful. How is this child up there? I still find it very uncomfortable to watch. I've watched it half a dozen times, the whole thing, and I find it extremely uncomfortable as a child psychologist and as a mother. I kind of just want to walk onto that stage and pull her off. I want to give her a hug.
Well, this is what I wrote yesterday. It was my initial response as a father. How could people just sit there and applaud her? She needs comforting, consoling. She needs education. For instance, no one in the world says it's that bad, that people are dying and you need such doom and gloom. So those essential facts need to reassure her as an impressionable teenager. Is that a fair assessment?
Absolutely. I don't see this as an act she's putting on. I think she absolutely believes in her heart of hearts that we've got 10 years left for this planet. And as I said yesterday, I'm seeing that in my office for children under 10. I think what confuses me is that we absolutely accept that children are developmentally not ready to get some information when it comes to certain topics. So if I advise parents how to talk about a death in the family or divorce, we change the language and we do it at a developmentally appropriate stage. But when it comes to climate change, we can just say, anything goes and it's all doom and gloom and the world's ending and starvation and death. And we need to remember 6, 7, 8-year-old minds cannot cope with that. They're very binary, they're very simple, they're very black and white. It's good and bad, good and evil, and they can't developmentally process that.
Well, and we see before our very eyes at some climate protests how young people can respond to this. Let's just have a look at this. This is not from last weekend's protest. This is a young girl on the streets of Sydney earlier this year.
I just don't know if they're going to do anything. And I'm so concerned with the fact that if they're not going to change anything, then what's going to happen to humankind? What's going to happen to the whole world if no one does anything?
Yeah, there we go. Now, Claire, that little girl is scared and upset. What can be the medium-term, long-term impacts of all that?
She's terrified. And as I said yesterday, I don't buy the argument that that's going to mobilise someone to change and to try and take action against whatever the topic is, climate change or otherwise. If you absolutely believe that your death is nigh, as that poor child does, that's just debilitating. And I think Scott Morrison absolutely got it right when he said, he does talk to his children about climate change. He doesn't talk to them about Paris targets and Kyoto and so forth, but he talks to them about fossil fuels and he talks to them about other environmental things we can do, plastics and there are other ways and other concerns for the environment, and that's not a bad thing. But we don't want to make kids more anxious. They've got enough on their plate already.
I want to come back to that if there's time in a moment, but I just want to get one more thought from you on Greta Thunberg herself, right? Now, I've pointed out, we know she's been diagnosed with Asperger's and obsessive-compulsive disorder. I just point those out because that's on the public record and she speaks about that. Others, I think, are very derogatory towards her about her mental state, but to what extent do those disorders play into this, and to what extent should people be concerned about her own personal welfare?
Yeah, I think definitely when we're looking at someone, obviously there's many traits of Asperger's disorder, but obviously she has difficulty in managing her emotions. She would see things quite literally as someone on the spectrum. I know she calls it her superpower, and all power to that. I work with kids on the spectrum every day, but absolutely there would be concerns of the way that she would be processing this information. She has absolutely admitted that, you know, by the very nature that the fact she has obsessive compulsive disorder and Asperger's means that she cannot process, you know, things emotionally like the rest of us do.
Will all this public attention make her own personal development more traumatic? Will it do her damage?
Look, that's really hard to say. I don't know how she's handling certainly some of the backlash at the moment. It's really hard to say. I don't know where her parents are, and as I said, my instinct was to go in and kind of shelter her and take her away from this.
Sure. All right. Now let's talk about what we can do with our young people. Let's forget about the public debate. That's adults and they're mad and screaming at each other, so let them go. But our children who might see Greta Thunberg saying that we're all going to die, they hear very alarmist comments from grown-ups, from political activists, from the Greens and whatever, saying that the planet's going to be destroyed. So how do we shelter children from this, or how do we counter that? Because they're going to be exposed to that regardless. How do we have some sort of counterweight to that so that they are balanced, they are sensible, they are not traumatised?
Yeah, I think it depends on the age. So if we're talking about younger kids under the 8 years old, they will be exposed to it, but they're at an age where they're going to look to mum and dad. And if you provide constant reassurance that things are not that dire, which they are not, they will be fine. They will look to parents. Once you're talking about kids 11, 12, 13, and that's a developmental age where, you know, what does mum and dad know?
Exactly.
I'm going to look to everyone else. So
that's when the parents should talk up the alarmism, so maybe they'll reject it.
That's right. So once you're looking at that age, unfortunately, you're right, they're exposed to it. So we need to provide them some perspective, don't we? I mean, we need to provide them with, unfortunately, some other facts, which include, you know, Australia spending more on renewable energies per capita than any other country at the moment, and it's perspective, but unfortunately, as we said yesterday, that they're not getting that from anywhere else. Well,
this is where the politicians are letting down the children. I mean, there's enough to debate here if you stick to the facts. We all know that. There's high levels of contention if you just stick to the facts. So there's no need to exaggerate. That's right. But there's many people out there, the ones calling Greta a hero out there, that will not have the debate in that way. I mean, so that makes it very, very hard and gives children the message that they are not necessarily allowed to think independently. So allowing that discussion around the dinner table, best place. You know, your 12-year-olds around the dinner table, have the discussion. They would have heard about climate change at school. Start chatting about it. Thanks, Claire. I really appreciate your time.
No problem.